Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm Chad Blair with Honolulu Civil Beat. It's great to see so many familiar faces and so many people filling up this conference room, even though legislature finished on Friday. The first time that I can remember that a session had ended on a Friday instead of a Thursday. There was some changes they made, the president and the speaker, and I think it's to the better. So thank you so much for coming today. We are not live. We will send out an email for you folks that have signed up for this when we do post this to YouTube, and I think we'll also post snippets, is the word I heard, to Instagram and Facebook. Does that sound about right? And as Ashley was saying earlier, we do not take direct questions from the audience in the sense that you don't get to stand up and speak your mind. Instead, we ask you to fill out these little white cards, index cards. Look for the Civil Beat staff in the green shirts. You can't miss them. Ashley and Asia and Courtney. There's Megan on the camera. And they will try and decipher your handwriting as best as they can. We do ask you to silence your phones. That would be appreciated. Vibrate, I guess, is okay as long as it's not too late. Two other items of business. We have a civil cafe coming up later this month on condo issues, and it is slated for, if I'm reading this correctly, May the 24th at 10:30 a.m. It's actually in our Civil Beat offices, the new offices on Wailea, but I believe it's sold out. Is that right? But it will be recorded, and so we will be able to send you a recording, but it is moderated by reporter Stuart Yerton. I can tell you, whenever we post an issue, a story on condominiums, it just goes through the roof. I didn't realize that something like 1 out of every 4 people in the state of Hawaii lives in a condo, and there were a lot of bills regarding condominiums this year. Many of them died, including, I think, the insurance bill. I think that's, maybe follow up with you later on that one. But we do want you to keep in mind of that. And just one other thing on a personal and a professional note. If you did hear the news, Civil Beat the entire staff was honored to have become a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize this year. Yeah, thank you. It was specifically for our Maui fire coverage on breaking news reporting. We tied with the LA Times, which I believe had to do with a shooting story in that city. And the winner of the category was the Lookout in Santa Cruz, California. You remember how the Pacific Coast Highway has fallen into the ocean? So they did a lot of good reporting, and kudos to them. But I can tell you, from my understanding, it is the first time a media outlet from Hawaii, from Honolulu, has been recognized by the most prestigious award in journalism. And we had a little pauhana at the office yesterday, and everybody is just really, really stoked, and it really goes to every single person on the staff. Thank you for your support, and hopefully it's a harbinger, not a harbinger, a sign of good things to come going forward. So thank you for that. All right, to our guest, Jarrett Keohokalole. He's a Democrat representing Kaneohe and Kailua, formerly served in the House. He is chair of the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee, co-chair of the Native Hawaiian Caucus. I didn't know this. I didn't know you also went to Richardson Law School. I didn't know you had a law degree. Gene Ward, at the far right or far left, depending on how you look at it.
You said it right the first time.
Is the minority floor leader. He is a Republican representing Portlock, Hawaii Kai, and Kalama Valley, a Vietnam veteran who served as a translator and interpreter. Also served in the Peace Corps, Borneo. Is that right, Gene? Yes. In Borneo? Okay. Greggor Ilagan, House Vice Speaker, a Democrat representing Puna. Boy, it's a lot of areas. Can I just say Puna? Puna is vast. It includes Kalapana, Leilani Estates, Pahoa, Seaview. He also served, this is something I didn't know either, in the Air National Guard and on the Hawaii County Council before joining us. And Kirstin Kahaloa, she's a Democrat representing Honau Now, Napo'opo'o, help me if I'm getting the pronunciation incorrect. Captain Cook, I got that one. Keala Kekua, Keahau Holualoa, and Kailua Kona. This is her first term in office, a Native Hawaiian legislator who serves as the vice chair of Agriculture and Food Systems. The local food system and sustainability are a passion, as well as biosecurity. And I know that's important to all 4 of us here, and that's going to come up a little bit later. We're just going to go ahead and...
It's Representative Kahaloa. You got Keohokalole right, and you got...
It is, Kahaloa. In fact, Kahaloa, and my bad. And you know what? I live on Kahaloa Drive in Manoa. So that's a double mistake on my part. Thank you, Senator Kay, for the correction on that. Kirstin, I got Kirstin right, but my apologies for that, my bad. We're going to open up. I'm just going to use first names, by the way, if that's okay, not for pronunciation's sakes, but just because it's easier. And I think we're really doing talk story. This is not a formal press conference. It's really a chance to share our views and take questions. I'm going to give each of the our guests 7 or 8 minutes to talk about what was top of mind for them, for their chamber, for their party at the legislature this year. We'll then go to some questions from me. We'll go to questions from you. And then I'll also have a follow-up just on more personal items, something that might have been of particular interest to each of our lawmakers. And then we'll wrap it up with some more questions and hopefully be out of here at 1:30. Kirstin Kahaloa, representative, since I screwed up your name, would you mind going first? Can I give you the honors of going first?
Sure.
Thank you. The stage is yours.
There were so many amazing things we did during session, and as vice chair on the Agriculture and Food Systems Committee, I'll focus and lean in there first. I think for me, some of the highlights is that we had this biosecurity measure that was supposed to support the Department of Agriculture and be a tiny $2.5 million request to help shore up biosecurity efforts for the department. And it turned into a $20 million piece of legislation to support all areas of biosecurity efforts focused on agriculture, making the Department of Agriculture the lead, strengthening their position as the leader for the state for biosecurity efforts, and all the many measures that members submitted focusing on biosecurity efforts like little fire ants, coconut rhinoceros beetle, rose ring parakeets, feral chickens, all of those really important measures that made it to conference all kind of got squished into this measure. So for the bill itself, $20 million was put into the budget for programs and positions, but into the budget bill, HB 1800, there was also funding put in there. So we're looking at 110 new positions between the bill and the budget to shore up and strengthen biosecurity efforts and positions for the Department of Agriculture. That's super exciting. If you're not as excited as I am, for rose ring parakeet funding, that's $150,000 for Kauai and $150,000 here on Hawaii, here on Oahu. And that's really important as well. We have coqui frog funding, little fire ant funding. And then for coconut rhinoceros beetle, we really need to focus on efforts that has really pushed across the state and is also on Hawaii Island now in Waikoloa. And we want our beautiful coconut tree and our landscapes and our indigenous crops that may also be under attack by coconut rhinoceros beetle to be supported. So I think that's really important. And I also kind of want to shift into labeling of different agricultural products with the help of the Senate and our chair of CPN. We were able to look at legislation for coffee labeling and macadamia nut labeling. It's been nearly 3 decades that we've been focused on strengthening coffee legislation. So I just want to personally thank Senator for his leadership in that role, and for the House members and chair on the House side of CPC, Chair Nakashima. Kona's been desperate for this piece of legislation, and now in 3 years we'll see labeling at blends at minimum 50%. That's going to be huge, I think, for the coffee industry across the state. If you're using Ka'u coffee, Kauai coffee, whatever label, if you're using regional labeling, we felt it's important for those agricultural communities like Kona and others that if you're using those names, the majority of what's in the bag needs to be local. And so that's a big win for our community. Macadamia nuts as well, we strengthened labeling and simplified a disclosure label on macadamia nuts. We're just super excited by those different areas. Some of the highlights for community are Hawaii Island received more funding for healthcare initiatives. For our hospitals, we have 2 state hospitals in Hilo and in Kona, so shoring up funding for that I think is really exciting and important. For my district, we have some of the rural communities have really old public schools, and so funding in the budget for Hawaii Island was to set up a new district office for DAGs. So they support all the maintenance and repair for neighbor island schools, not directly the DOE. So with that, having a West Hawaii office, you're not sending staff from Hilo to clean and do repairs and maintenance on West Hawaii schools. If you knew how big of a deal that was for our community, setting up that office and new staffing is super exciting, and we're just thrilled that we have the opportunity to do that. Some of the things in agriculture is supporting just scale up of entrepreneurship and value added production. And one thing that is a win for our community is passing legislation to work with the Department of Health to create administrative rules to add certain homemade food items to their list of foods and to pull it off the extremely hazardous food list. Rural communities don't always have access to commercial kitchens to start entrepreneurship opportunities. So foods like, I have to look at the list, chutneys, salsa, sauerkrauts, barbecue sauces, relishes, hot sauces, and kimchi currently are not allowable in homemade kitchens and now will be with this legislation.
Kimchi?
Kimchi. So if you're not using a commercial kitchen, you cannot currently make it in a homemade kitchen until this legislation is passed. So what we did is asked, can we look at the list you have and can we add a few items so that farmers markets can have these? You still have to label it comes from a homemade kitchen, but they were illegal. So we're hoping to see more awesomeness at farmers markets across the state with this legislation, and if people can scale their operations, we can get them into commercial kitchens, hopefully get them into more shared value-added production facilities as we scale entrepreneurs and small businesses in agriculture. So those are just some of the amazing things that I wanted to start off with.
No, that's nice. That's a very nice summary. I do want to follow up with a couple of questions before we go on to Jarrett. And by the way this works, you can interject everybody and say, I just want to follow up, this, that, and everything. But I did want to ask you $20 million for invasives and then 110 positions for the DOA. Was spittlebugs, is that another invasive? Did you mention that one? What
I
is a
forgot
spittlebug?
and that impacts Kona quite a lot. So two-line spittlebug is an invasive pest that's ravaging cattle grasses on Hawaii Island, mostly in Kona. So there is $800,000 appropriated to help assist that. So basically, if there's no healthy grass for our cattle to eat, then there is nowhere for them to graze. And so that's been a newer pest that's been introduced that we're trying really hard to get rid of.
Okay.
So I believe it is only found on Hawaii Island still. Like most pests, we have almost all of them.
Well, I guess that leads to my next question, and I know that obviously we have two people here from the Big Island. It's nice to have neighbor island folks come over when we're not in the session, and Jarrett has really shined the light on what's happening on the windward side. And I guess my question to you, Kirstin, is what took so long for the legislature to get it on invasive species to really move on this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different factors. I forgot to mention that HB 2619 is in honor of the late Representative Cliff Suji.
That's right.
So we honored the leadership that he put into his time at the legislature as chair on the Ag Committee of the House. And so there was the most recent act. There was a Cliff Suji Act honoring biosecurity funding prior to the pandemic, and what we saw is that funds shifted and were pulled back from the department. One other example is we haven't seen staffing return for some positions that have been pulled back from the Department of Ag since 2013. So of those 110 positions, yes, some of them shifting into different funding sources from our cargo fee into A funds. What we're seeing is they are new positions, but basically we're reclassifying those positions that were formerly there for the department many years ago. So, there's so many things we have to pay for in the legislature, and I think some of the louder voices from the legislature, from our windward legislative delegation, really help elevate the need for biosecurity efforts. When it's singularly on a neighbor island in rural communities, maybe those voices aren't heard as loud. So having legislators from Oahu really get into the position that this is a crisis, and it has been, and how we elevate that, I think, is really important. Chair Yamashita on the floor last week indicated that to protect invasive pests from the continent, there are over 400 ag USDA workers at our airports and protecting the borders from the continent. And we don't have the equivalent of that protecting things coming into the state of Hawaii. So that's just an example of how critical this time is and what we need to do. So this, for me, and I hope for the legislature as well, is just a start to the necessary funding. Hawaii Farm Bureau said with inflation, we probably need, I believe they said $90 million to really make a dent in biosecurity. I believe that is accurate. So instead of $2.5 million, we went to 20. We probably need 90, but this is a start, and we're going to continue the conversation and hopefully be able to speak to the leadership of the department to get things done in biosecurity.
okay.
If not, we'll really have to have some further conversations.
That's great. I'm sure Jarrett and others want to join in. Gene, I didn't mean to leave you out. Are there coqui frogs in Hawaii Kai? Or are you seeing invasives in your district?
They come in from.
Mike?
Oh, sorry. They sneak in from Waimanalo, but the realization that they were known to be here 3 to 5 years ago, but we never believed it until it was a crisis. And now we're fighting, it's like the coqui frogs. They knew they were there. We never put the money in. And it's this organization and all of us who never saw the seriousness of it until it got so aggressive and all-consuming.
Okay, good. We'll follow up with this. Kirstin, one last question. What did take so long for Mac Nuts and coffee, in particular Kona coffee, but as you pointed out, it's not just Kona that produces coffee here locally. What do you think finally moved I know Nicole Lowen didn't get everything she wanted. I think she was looking for 100% Kona in some cases. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but what do you think made the difference this time?
We just had awesome legislators willing to push it this year. I will say I am a newly added legislative seat in Kona, so it gave us an extra voice. We also have Senator Tim Richards, who covers a little bit more of Kona than the previous senator did, and his passion for agriculture meant that he was going to care more and do more for agriculture, and that's a passion point of mine as well. So having direct legislators of the region sitting on those subject matter areas and helping push. And then again, we also moved it as more of not just an agricultural issue, but a consumer protection and how we focus on truth in labeling. And I think over the years, as we started to pivot to truth in labeling, not just agriculture and agricultural labeling, I think that shifted the conversation a little bit. But we also had to actualize that we, over the course of 3 decades, have asked for concessions from 100%. And that concession kind of sat right into majority of the bag. So we had to continue focused. I know the original legislation was 100%. That's where the conversation shifted in previous sessions. So would we fight back on a bill to push back all the years that we kind of got to some happy consensus and fight to move it in the needle where farmers really want it, or sit in the middle between manufacturing, retail, and our farmers, and where do we sit to find agreement? And I think that's how bills make it through, is where we find that middle ground, and we stick to that, and we honor that, and we try our best to get a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirstin. Let's segue into Jarrett, not just because of consumer protection and biosecurity, but certainly those are good reasons. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chad, for moderating and for having me. This year, I'm so glad this year is over. This was one of the most challenging years at the legislature that I've been a part of. COVID was easily the toughest, but coming in with the pressure of the Maui wildfire situation was very challenging. What I personally learned, and many other legislators knew over the course of the last, learned over the course of the last 10 years was that when you get federal support for disasters, whether it's the lava flow or the Kauai landslide or the wildfires or COVID, federal support is almost always rather cumbersome to manage. And federal timelines and federal guidelines, they exist in their own space outside of what the state of Hawaii or the counties are used to dealing with. And when it came to the Maui wildfire support, so many of the programs and so much of the funding was allocated from FEMA and other areas of the federal government as a reimbursement. And we are constitutionally required in the legislature to balance the budget on a 2-year timeline that the federal government does not recognize, and they're not very concerned about, because a promise is a promise, and when the money is allocated, in a program, then the expectation is there, the commitment is there to recoup it. But when you have these huge allocations, $500 million, $300 million for different areas of support on Maui, for housing, for food, for mitigation, debris removal, things like that, those are huge chunks of funding for the state to have to account for in our budget. And there was so much unknown at the beginning of the session that it created a lot of pressure, especially because we were in the second year of the legislative session, the second year of a budget, a 2-year budget cycle, which means, the first year money is already committed and allocated. And much of the actual work on the ground that was done by the state from August to the beginning of the legislature on Maui was executed by state departments dipping into their existing year budget. And so it was sort of a double whammy, trying to understand and allocate appropriately what we need going forward, and then how to make departments like the Department of Education whole that spent tens of millions of dollars in a response, because what we're very good at in the state of Hawaii is that when a crisis situation happens, we just go and take care of it. I have personal experience from this because the Pali landslide happened several years ago, and it happened, if I remember correctly, right around the time the hurricane in Houston hit. There was a federal disaster at the same time, and in Congress, there was a fight over allocation of money to deal with that national disaster at the same time the Pali landslide happened. And so as the representative for Kaneohe at the time, the day after it happened, I remember going to Finance Chair Sylvia Luke's office and preparing to make an ask for support. And I remember that I remember her sort of tone, which was sort of a casual, "Thanks for asking, Jarrett, but we've already allocated everything." Huh. There was really no fighting that needed to be done. And that happened while at the federal level they were having fights over whether to provide disaster relief for, I think it was Texas or Florida. So when there's a catastrophe in Hawaii, I think we're very good at just going and getting done what needs to be done in terms of allocating resources and funding. Where we often fall short or run into trouble is for issues that are just below catastrophe level. Part of it is because there are so many of them, and it becomes a fight over prioritization. And then there are lots of other reasons that are fair or deserve criticism. But a lot of what we were trying to deal with at the beginning of the legislative session was sort of gaining an understanding of what had happened, how to deal with that going forward, make agencies whole, deal with the accounting of those actions, and then how to project forward what was needed, what can be anticipated to be reimbursed on our budget cycle timeline, and then what other expenses we can account for in the later years. So that's sort of a cumbersome setting of the stage for the beginning of the legislature. And then as time progressed during the session, it became clear that housing started to get rolling. There was more clarity from the federal government on what was going to be reimbursed and on what timeline, and the pressure released a bit. And that set the stage for some of the big actions that took place at the end of the legislative session that I'm really proud of and grateful that we were able to come to decisions on. We knew we were going to need to deal with the hazard pay situation, which was...
Explain that, what that means and who gets
Sure.
that pay.
Hazard pay is allotted to public employees of certain classifications according to their contract. And there was a process that took place over the last several years to account for how many state workers were placed according to their contract in a hazardous situation by coming into work during COVID.
And we're talking about unionized workforce, correct?
That's right,
Public
unionized.
unions.
Mostly HGEA workers, an assortment of bargaining units. I have it in front of me. But we knew that was going to be a significant allocation of money.
It's like hundreds and hundreds of
I
millions.
think it's $450 million
Wow.
that's going to go to state workers for payments that accrued over the pandemic for work that was conducted that they were required to go and participate in during the pandemic. So we knew we were going to have to account for that. We knew we were going to have to account for making the departments whole for emergency Maui actions, and we knew we were going to have to deal with how you deal with the continuing recovery, but to also do the income tax cut, which was the largest tax cut in state history. To do the GET exemption on Medicare and Medicaid and TRICARE, which is $76 million a year, was really significant. And those are two items in particular that I'm very proud that we were able to take care of, because for the last several years, especially since the price spikes and inflation happened during COVID, to me, the number one issue facing the legislature from the public standpoint post-COVID has been how to deal with the cost of living, how to help people adjust to the price spikes. And so I said it on the Senate floor, we're the legislature, our primary task is the purse, the power of the purse to tax and spend and allocate money for programming. So the most direct action that the legislature can take to ease the cost of living is to reduce taxes, because we have direct control over it. And also especially in rural areas, healthcare is such an access and cost issue. To make it easier for the doctors to open their doors to low-income patients who are getting benefits through Medicare and Medicaid is really significant, because it impacts more than just the pocketbook. It impacts the whole family because of what it takes to deal with healthcare in rural areas. So I'll stop there, actually.
Okay. No,
I could go,
I know you can.
but I don't really want to be here anyway, so I'll just stop right now. No, I'm just kidding. I'm happy to talk about it. We did really good stuff.
When Jarrett and I talked yesterday about what was going to go on, he said, I had the whole weekend to block everything out, and now you're going to make me bring it back into my brain. I said, I feel the same way. I don't think I've seen a legislature so tired in a very long time, and I've covered my share. A couple of quick questions, and then we're going to switch over to Gene and then Greggor. In terms of the hazard pay, and this is in part from questions that we got from our readers, is HGEA, is it also going to include UPW and the DOE, the HSTA, I guess, the teachers union, it would be HSTA?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can go
answer.
back and check. There are a specific number
But for
of
now,
bargaining
it's
units
just
that have it in their
HGEA,
contract.
right? Yeah, okay, but it is part of their contract, and we'll have to see. It sounds like it might be a possibility going forward, but
So I believe there were appeals that were made by other bargaining units, but the bill pertains specifically to the bargaining units that had this hazard pay provision
got it.
in their employment contract.
Got it. Okay. A quick question on feral chickens. HB, and I know Hawaii Kai has a feral chicken problem. Everybody has a feral chicken problem. This is from a reader, HB 2619, the bill that Kirstin mentioned. Correct me if I'm wrong, or correct the reader. It gives $50 per county. Well, let me get this right. $50,000 per county to address feral chickens. I think it's a matching fund. Isn't that right? Is that enough money? What can you do with $50,000 at the Big Island, Oahu, Maui County, which is several islands, Kauai?
I don't know. More than $0.
More than zero. Okay, all right. Kirstin, what do you think? Is that going to help?
It's a start, and yes, there is a requirement. So a bill was passed by Senator Kim to make sure there's teeth in the program and the process of how
Got
that
it.
funding gets allocated. Because originally it was, we don't need the bill, we put it in HB 2619. But $50,000 is a start, and we're hoping that that also puts buy-in from the counties to facilitate the program. We're not just throwing money at a problem. The counties also need to come in there with facilitation of the program as well as matching funding. So there's a feral chicken problem all across the state. We probably could put more, but I think there's other invasive pests right now that are at a higher prioritization. If you ask many other legislators across the state, they'd rather address other issues first.
Got it.
I will say, as a kid in the mid-'90s in Kaneohe, we spent most of our summers catching chickens. If I knew there was $50,000 available at that time, we could have sole-sourced that contract to a dozen kids in Kaneohe. We would have
Good
made
point.
it happen.
Two more questions. One of them silly, the other one serious, and it's for Jarrett before we move on to Jean. How's the electricity in your house in Kaneohe? Let me now
So
read
I'm
you-
slow, but I
Yeah,
get it.
It's okay.
It's funny.
It's all right.
It still works.
Here's the real question. It's coming from a reader. Can you share more behind the HECO bill and what further, the securitization bill, and what further info is needed for them, the utility, to have this type of legislation move forward in the future? And where that is last I checked, the governor's office is trying to work something out. I don't know if it's going to require a special session. I don't know. But the question was, tell us a little bit more about what happened there with the HECO bill. Not too much, because I do want to get on to our other guest.
You know, I'm not sure how much more I can say other than what I've already said, which is that it would be helpful for us to make a determination if we would be provided with the amount of money that they need, a clearly defined plan and list of items that they would like to spend it on, and then at least an estimated accounting of what that fee would look like for consumers. And because we were not given any of those things, despite asking for them for the entirety of the legislative session, it made making a commitment on behalf of the ratepayers and consumers of the state, because even residents of Kauai will pay that fee. They'll pay it because the shippers in Honolulu Harbor will pay it.
Even though they have their own utility co-op.
That's right, but I think I mentioned this. I think 65% or more of the rate base of HECO are industrial and commercial users. And so a 5% cap on the fee, a 5% based off of the average ratepayer home electric bill doesn't provide a whole lot of clarity on what that fee actually means for an industrial commercial user, like Matson's Base Yard in Honolulu Harbor. And so without more details on that, there was a significant amount of discomfort with committing ratepayers to a fee of an unknown amount for the next 30 years.
This is for them to float bonds so that they could use that money to then mitigate against future fires, essentially boiling.
Well, there were several different proposals, and the bill changed dramatically as the session progressed.
Senate Bill 2922.
Well, and then I think it was HB 2700.
The property
Right. There were 6 bills in total, 3
Correct.
on the House side, 3 on the Senate side.
specific to Hawaiian Electric.
That's right. And so the proposals changed dramatically over the legislative session. And you have been around the legislature long enough to know that when bills take multiple forms as the session progresses, and then you get into the final days of conference and the bills still have multiple moving pieces to it that are causing confusion, that's almost always a guarantee. It's almost always a certainty that the bill will not proceed because it might just not be ready yet.
Okay. I appreciate.
Can I
your
give
frank-
the other side of that story?
Absolutely, Jean. And thank you for being frank. And speaking of frank, Jean,
We are on the edge of losing our local ownership of our utility. I don't think Robert's rules allow you to intervene
Yeah, let's
on
keep
that.
the questions to the no cards if we can. To Jean's point, please continue.
Local as much as possible, because what we've got is a situation where all they want to do is get cheaper money. We didn't have to put any of ourselves on the line. They just wanted to borrow money. They got 105 lawsuits, et cetera, against them. So what we're doing, and I was probably the only one at this table, other than maybe Chad, that when in 1992, Iniki knocked out Kauai. We gave Kauai every dollar that they needed to survive. If you guys remember, HECO rates have already gone up 30% in the last 30 years. I mean, the last 30 months, or the last year, in effect. And what this bill does is cap the rate increase at 5%. And many of the HECO people said it's at 3%. So we're nickeling and diming HECO at a time when, in effect, if we lose them, we think that our rates are high now. Wait till the mainland, the next era guys who are going to come in, when they come in, and we're not going to be able to control them, we will have been penny wise and pound foolish. My point, and look, I don't have, maybe I got $10 worth of HECO stock, so I'm not arguing for any personal interest. But when we've got the history of Hawaii in HECO, I think we should think twice about that. Now, having said that, Chad, you did some great reporting on the salaries of HECO. They are almost as tone deaf as sometimes this legislature is of what's going on in the minds of the people. Some of the outrageous salaries that they have are totally unacceptable. Now, if the good senator would rag on that one, I would totally agree. But the point of losing the ownership locally under control by local people who are local professionals who know the local culture, that's the important thing. And if you bring in the mainland boys, profit is the bottom line, not anything other than that. So having said that, I think we need to revisit it, even if it's a special session. And I know the governor's talked about secularization, which is a strange...
Securitization.
Securitization, which is kind of a funny way of saying they want to borrow money at a cheaper rate.
Okay, and Jean, did you, the good senator has a response, yes.
You know, I mean, if the minority caucus of the legislature would like to propose some conditions or guidelines to put upon HECO in lieu of securitization, you know, I'm willing to entertain them. We did not hear that at any point in the legislative session. And like I said, the uses that were requested for the money from HECO changed dramatically over time. They included settlement costs for litigation. You know, securitization bond language is very dense and complicated subject matter. The Attorney General's office had their own alternative proposal that they included in the testimony in the written record. And ultimately, you know, once the fee is ordered, authorized by the PUC, it goes on the front of every ratepayer's bill for 30 years. HECO gets the money, the bonded money, and there were no restrictions after the fact on how that money could be utilized. And there is really no way that I see to assure that HECO will remain locally owned until we have some certainty on the outcomes of those lawsuits. So if that is what we are talking about, and the minority caucus would like to put forward a bill that guarantees HECO's liabilities in these wildfire lawsuits, then that's a different bill than I believe we were debating in the legislature this year.
Okay, Jean, go ahead and respond, and let's move on to other issues.
The senator didn't see H.R. 205, which basically promotes the local ownership of HECO.
That's a resolution.
That's a
correct?
resolution. It was only in the House, so probably he wouldn't know about it. But the point is, if we don't look farther down the line, the consequences could be much more severe than, hey, we don't want... I mean, it's good. Look, it's an election year. Everybody wants to be in the favor of everybody. We don't want to make your electric bills go higher. But in the long run, they are going to go higher. And if there's anything that America is not doing very well, is long-range planning. That's why the Chinese are eating our lunch, but that's a different issue. Having said that, I think we got to face this thing, and as you said, Chad, it could be and should be probably a special session.
Okay, is there anything else you want to add in terms of, maybe I could just ask you, if I understood Lauren Matsumoto, the minority leader in the House, she really said the GET exemption for Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE to help the local providers, medical providers, as well as the tax cut are things that Republicans have been pushing year after year after year. How come the Democrats finally listened to you guys on these two things?
Well, it takes hard to penetrate some of the size and the density of their skulls. Let me put it that way. The point being, we have for decades, and you guys know I've been around for a while, but it's when people realize the value of it, people jump on it. A lot of the bills that we introduced never come alive until a session or two later, or three, and then it's a Democrat bill. But that's the job of the loyal opposition. I don't feel bad about it, but what she's saying is very true. We have been saying for GT tax exemption for food and for medicine for decades upon decades. Just like Sam Sloan, for every year he says, let's have term limits. 72% of you believe in term limits. Has it come to pass? No, because the other three sitting at this, maybe other four sitting at this table, will not have it. So there you go. It's where...
Says the man who's been serving for 28 years in the legislature.
No, only 22 or something like that.
Fair enough, fair enough. One other question, Gene, and then I want to get to Greggor. If I understand correctly, the tax cut, which they say primarily helps the lower and middle income, although critics have said it actually helps higher income as well. That's $5 billion in lost revenue over the next 5 years, 6 years. Where's that revenue going to come from?
If you know my office, one of our priorities, in the area of priorities, is Hawaiian issues, Alice families, and then thirdly, in which we never pay any attention to, is diversification of our economy. We are just cutting the pie smaller and smaller. We're never growing the pie, and that's something that I think we are negligent in doing. We've got to diversify our economy. We could be the Hollywood of the Pacific with a drop of a hat. There are high-paying jobs, $80,000 and $90,000. We could be the space tourism center of the Pacific. But then there are EPA issues, and I know the Big Island we usually yield to you. We could be the sports center of the Pacific. The East-West Center, diplomatic center with the U.S., Asia-Pacific Security Studies Center in Waikiki, Fort DeRusi. There's so many things that we have talked about, but we never face that one directly, except I think Senator Wakai has got a bit of a piece of it. My point is, in the long-range survival, as we get more competition from overseas for tourism, we're going to slowly fade away and not be as vital as we are. And we got 15,000 people per year voting with their feet saying, hey, I can't make it here. We don't give them the jobs. We don't give them the opportunity to become Hawaii citizens because they're disenfranchised economically.
No, thank you, Rep. Ward. Greggor, last but not least, you have the floor. What was top of mind for you?
I haven't even given my opening statement yet.
Tell you what, let's have Greggor speak, and let's go back and briefly recap or briefly state the opening statement. But I feel like I got to get Greggor in here.
Chad, you sure I shouldn't defer my speech for Gene Ward's opening statement?
Isn't that what you guys do on the floor? I give my time to the speaker from Hawaii. But go ahead first, Greggor, and then we'll go back to Gene.
Since we're talking about the floor, if you need me to strike out the words of any representative out of the record due to
this is all house stuff. I don't know what they're talking about.
It is true. It is all house stuff.
I do want to start off with my appreciation to the senator, because one of the things that I was very passionate about going into this legislative session is dealing with insurance. And I worked with him on trying to address the insurance problem in Puna. And he was very receptive and open, and he passed out a couple bills out of his committee. So I really want to take this time to say thank you, Senator, for that. Chad, it's great seeing you and Civil Beat. I know all the readers here are very knowledgeable and experienced, so I'm not having to explain everything, and I feel like you know more than I do, actually. So I want to say thank you for being here. I came into this session, I was actually a freshman, like Kirstin, just 2 years ago, and this is my 4th year, and it has been exhausting. And Senator has pointed out some things, like I came in during COVID. Can you imagine this building was closed at that time, and now we're back open to the public, and on top of that, we've actually improved our communication with our constituents and the public because we have teleconference now, and we are able to have people from the neighbor island testify, or if you're in Port Lock, where Gene's at, he can also testify. So the thing is, or anyway,
It's next to Hawaii Kai.
Hawaii Kai. Sorry, when I think of a very great place to live, I think of those areas. I live in Puna, and it's the easternmost part of the Big Island. And I came into this with a different perspective than what I know now. And one of the biggest perspective is that I always thought that everybody was against Puna, and that Hilo, which was the more city area, typically takes more than their fair share. But now, as a neighbor island, looking at the statewide, we always think the state is very Oahu-centric. But as I've sat in this position and with Speaker Saiki, he actually has a leadership team of a lot of neighbor islands. Our majority leader is Nadine Nakamura in Kauai. Our majority leader, Dee, is also from Kauai. Our finance chair is from the neighbor island.
Maui.
In Maui. So when Chad was talking about why some of these things like addressing invasive species is happening now, we also have a lot of neighbor island perspective in our leadership roles. So a lot of neighbor island issues are coming up in the forefront as well. And as I really appreciate the work that Speaker Saiki has put forward, for example, this whole legislative session doesn't just extend from January, it actually goes all the way to the interim. In the House, our speaker initiated 6 working groups, and is actually a bipartisan package with our Republican colleague. And we got into the Maui wildfire and had to run those committees during the interim. So there wasn't really any break during that time. And that was all the House members getting involved in the issue. And I'm not new to any sort of disaster. I was in the lava flow in Puna, and it's been 6 years since we're going through a recovery. So I understand the problems that Senator brought up regarding the federal funding, because one of the things was our Puhiki boat ramp.
Right.
And at that time, last year, I was trying to acquire $40 million for the boat ramp, and our department was stating that 75% of that was going to be reimbursed. But during this legislative session, I found out that only $5 million of that was going to be reimbursed. So dealing with the federal government is not easy. And I'm sure the county can say the same thing with the state. But we all need to work together at all levels of the government to figure out the hard problems that we have here in Hawaii. And one of those hard problems is dealing with housing, as well as dealing with the high cost of living. And Senator mentioned regarding the tax breaks that that we have pushed and delivered this year. I mean, we're talking about $5 billion over 6 years. And we're looking at right now, before the law passed, actually, the law's not enacted yet, but we were sitting at the second highest tax state. With this new tax break, we would be the 4th lowest. That's a huge, enormous delivery to our constituents and our people here in Hawaii. And I'm just going to end this because I want to get into the discussion
Sure.
here. I am glad to be here because I get to share more about Puna, and I feel like Puna doesn't get brought up ever in any state discussion, but it's great to be present here with everyone and share some of the issues in my district. And some of those issues is dealing with insurance. And I want to end with the fact that even though the lava flow had made insurance go from $2,000 to $8,000 a year, we have an insurance problem in the state. I mean, we had to deal with the condos, and Senator can touch up on that. We are going to feel that impact in the next 4, if not sooner, because Puna has felt it 5 years ago. Like, it didn't happen until 5 years later. So Puna can be the model that it will come, and it did happen. And it wasn't the first thing that happened when the lava disaster occurred. But a couple more years from now, we're going to have problems, and one of those problems is going to deal with insurance.
Okay, very good, Greggor. One question, and then I'll go to Gene, and then I just want to take the rest of the session, the half an hour we have left, questions from you guys. Speaking of which, if you do have questions, even if they're on Hawaiian Electric, please raise your hand. We can get you an index card right now, and they will bring those forward. One question to follow up with you, Pohoiki. I've seen it. I've spent a lot of time in Puna. What exactly did the lava flow do to the boat ramp at Pohoiki? Pohoiki. I hope I got
Thanks,
that right.
Chad.
Yeah.
So the lava actually did not hit Pohoiki, but what happened is when lava touches the water, it creates these fine sands, and these sands ended up with the current landlocking our only boat ramp. And when you think of how important that is, imagine Oahu, the coastline of Oahu. If the coastline of Oahu doesn't have a boat ramp, it's the same equivalent as Hilo boat ramp all the way to Ka'u. That shoreline from Ka'u to Hilo is the same amount of length and shoreline as Oahu. And I'm sharing that because I bet a majority of the people here are from Oahu, and you can see that we would need to access our ocean, and this is our icebox, our fishermen who would have to go all the way to Ka'u or Hilo to actually launch their boats. And these are livelihoods in our communities that rely on fishing. And it's very important for us. And I actually, Chad, host 12 town halls every year. And it's been 3 years now, so I've hosted 36 town halls in my community. And last year, Puhiki Boat Ramp was the #1 issue out of the 12 town halls that year. And I'm so glad that we were able to deliver, because now we're going through the process of acquiring the permits and dredging out the Puhiki Boat Ramp. Again, the federal government actually came in and had some barriers. One of them I want to point out is that now I got to talk to the DOBOR, but I hope that they resolve this. But the problem was that U.S. Wildlife deemed that area to be a sanctuary for sea turtles. But we talked to the lifeguards, and they said they've never seen any sea turtles around that area. So these are the problems that we have. Representative Ward has mentioned all these things that we want to have, and these issues are not so clear-cut. We want to have more affordable housing. We want to lower the cost of living. We want a utility that pays really minimal to our community, but we have 40 cents per kilowatt hour. we're talking about the highest cost of electricity, and trying to push renewable energy. I have a geothermal site in my area, which is a very low cost when we're dealing with flat rate, but there's controversy in that development alone. And when we jump into wind and Kauai, there's other things. So all I'm just trying to point out to everyone is I respect everyone here because these issues are so, it's not so clear and cut. The details really matters, and to make those decisions is not easy to make. So I want to say thank you for everyone here, and thank you, Chad,
Thank
for
you,
allowing
Greggor.
us to be here.
And before Gene talks, I just want to say one plus side of what happened to Pohoiki is it made a huge black sand beach. The downside is you have to drive your fishing boat on Highway 130 to get into Hilo or go down to Ka'u. That's just not good. Gene, if we could just briefly have what's top of mind for you, because I do want to get into more questions. But please, what was important to you in particular or top of mind this session?
Thank you, Chad. Thank you for this event. Cafe without any coffee is like a beer summit without
Why
any beer.
don't we have coffee anymore? What's the story? I don't even want to know. Okay.
But before I give all of the grades that I have for all the different issues, I wanted to ask you your opinions about how we did in the session. If you think we did above average, would you raise your hands and show that we did above average? Okay, that's cool.
About
And-
half, roughly.
I didn't see half.
Okay, let's 40%. Okay.
If it was so-so, raise your hand. Okay.
A couple hands.
If it was a failure, raise your hand.
A
Okay.
handful raising.
I know Chad's competitor is the Star Advertiser, but they did a poll, and then they found out that according to what was average, 29% said average, 67%, or two-thirds, say that we did not meet expectations, and 4% said above average. That's kind of a different impression than we have given you. Now, we're not gaslighting you, but we're telling you probably the best possible scenario of the things that happened. And I'm very impressed with the tax increase, the poor families that have been used. But I've gone through a number of these things, particularly the Maui wildfires. And I don't know how much time you want to give me, but I've given it a B+ for the Maui thing, but we said this is going to be Maui-centric. Kauai, we put $3 billion, and we've only given a picayune $1 billion plus for Maui that we know of. It's probably going to be near $6 billion. How much ahead do we know that? We don't even know the cause of the fire yet, which we don't get until December, after the election, and it's not from our local investigation. It's from the alcohol, tobacco, and firearm feds somewhere before Christmas, or maybe Christmas. We've done a fire marshal, so we're learning, but we don't have in our budget things that we've learned and things that we should be financing now so it doesn't happen again. So I think we're a little bit behind the curve, like with the rhinoceros beetles. You know, until it really gets serious, we don't do it. I have a number of things individually in terms of subject matter and grades, but otherwise, I thank you guys for coming after the session is over. Like the good senator said, gee, I didn't want to come, but you guys came back. And thank you for being here. Chad, that's my opening
No,
remarks.
thank you, Gene, for keeping it succinct. Yes, go ahead, Greggor. I yield my time to the representative from Puna.
Thank you, Chad. I do want to point out that when it comes to the impact of the Maui wildfire, we have to consider the future impact. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because the $1 billion that we provided to Maui that goes to the hotels that they needed to stay at, which Puna never had, all the different shelters, to all the expenses that they needed to fund. In the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to hit their property taxes. Right now, they don't see what's gonna happen with, they don't feel it as much, because there's a delay in property taxes when it comes to assessing and retrieving that. That's when the county is going to really need their help. And to be able to have the resources to be able to support Maui in the next 10 years is going to be what we need to do. It's not just this year that we need to fund Maui. We're going to need to help Maui in the next 10 years. So when Representative Ward mentioned we haven't done enough for Maui, we're doing quite a lot for Maui. I wish that Puna had the same amount of funding that Maui is receiving as of this year.
A very brief retort. If you talk to the business community in Maui, you talk to the man on the street in Maui, what we're doing so slow and so having no timeline and no certainty, I think the public opinion in Maui would contradict that. And now, look, I'm not a Maui person. But I listened to Maui. I went to Maui. We had a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce. And they said, what are you guys doing? When are you going to do something? You know, I was on the jobs and business group. They are the drowning businesses. And you know what we did legislatively? And I say this in all sincerity, but we said, in effect, we're going to give you one adjunct professor at Maui Community College, which is in effect, if you're a drowning business, we're going to throw you, instead of throwing you a lifeline, we're going to throw you swimming lessons. That's how I think we've treated the Maui business community. And that was it. And I'm not even
Thanks,
sure if
Gene.
that bill passed.
Kirstin?
Just a comment. I think there's always more we can do for Maui and for their recovery efforts with the wildfires, and we are going to do more, and it's going to take several years, like it took in Puna to get over the lava flow in 2018. We're still recovering from that. So I think the legislature, this is our first session. We have many more sessions where Maui recovery from the impacts of the wildfires will be a center focus. So Representative Ward, my colleague who I sit on every committee with and who I care about deeply, I think we did deliver. And our chair of finance is Kyle Yamashita, representing Maui. His district directly impacted by the wildfires upcountry, not in Lahaina, but I don't think he would be able to sleep at night if we didn't deliver for Maui in a big, big way. And he fought hard in our budget. And I agree, there's more we can do, but I think we delivered on what the state can deliver at this time. There's also the federal government who has to come in and support Maui, as well as our county. And I think everyone is working on those needs. Do we need to push forward with housing? Yes, we do. The county needs to take the lead on those issues. So the Office of Recovery for the County of Maui, I think that's their name, that new resilience office, we need to work with them, we need to support them, and we all need to work together. So it is a kako thing, and it's not only the state that has a stake in Maui recovery. I think we've done a lot. I think Lahaina Strong, their biggest request is the transient, not the transient accommodations,
STR.
the STRs and clamping down. And we introduced that bill. That bill was passed. There are things that didn't have a monetary value that mean a lot to Maui's recovery. That is one of them. As we look forward, Representative Ward, you mentioned we didn't do enough looking forward. The state fire marshal is one of them. Funding DLNR and DOFA in big to create fire breaks, to look at how we protect ourselves from future wildfires. There's a lot of different things we've done within the budget or within other pieces of legislation to look forward. But we still have a lot more to do and that we can do. I'm just excited that this session we thought we could only deliver for Maui, and I think one of the aha moments and why we are extra tired finishing this session is we had to deliver big and deliver big for Maui, but see how the rest of the state could also, get their needs met, whether that's in public schools or in higher education or in economic development. So there was a lot to do that can be done. And Representative Ward, we probably have to visit Maui again and see what their business outlook looks like now. But some of those issues are not areas that we are part of our state purview. So we need all hands on deck as we move forward with Maui recovery.
Kirstin, I hope you're right. Generally, I hope you're right. But I don't even see who's in charge of the Maui recovery. It's like we got all of these different
the
people.
county needs
We
to
don't have
take
a
the
Rudy
lead.
Giuliani who's in charge of you do this, you do that. It's like everybody's got everything.
Jarrett,
This is why I left the house.
this is what.
That was after 9/11.
Jarrett, the floor is yours.
Oh no, I was just trying to put
Okay,
this to
because
an
I have
end.
a question for you. Thank you. I'm getting to specific questions. And Jarrett, this one is for you. Why did you vote no on House Bill 1980 to increase penalties for illegal cockfighting, even though it was supported by statewide law enforcement and prosecutors? I don't know if that's the right number, but it would.
There were two.
Yeah,
Well,
one would have left it from
both
a
of the-
misdemeanor
so-
to a felony. I
Sure.
think, yeah.
So I think we should crack down on cockfighting. Both of those bills I had problems with because of the significance of the felony that was being proposed in them. So I'm not sure if it was that one or the other one, but there was strong pushback from the ranching community. We did pass. I moved in the Consumer Protection Committee the ban on surgical procedures unless you were a licensed
Animal cruelty, I think, is
veterinarian.
what we're calling
Well,
that
there were 5 or 6 or maybe even 7
Animal cruelty bills.
animal cruelty bills. Right. So so I'm not actually against the the policies here, but to allot B felonies to some of these actions, I had concerns about. Those were significant. I'm not sure if it was that one or the other one. We had that murder on the Makaha Ranch during the legislative session. The rancher came out and fired at an animal that was attacking his livestock. Found out subsequently that the animal was a hunting dog that was off leash because they were hunting from hunters who were illegally trespassing on the ranch. If the victim would have survived, the hunters could have pressed charges and pursued B felony charges against the guy for shooting at an animal attacking his livestock. I wasn't against the bill. Those bills needed, in my opinion, a harder look at the nature of the penalties that were being proposed, because I thought that they were too aggressive.
Got it. Greggor, speaking of animal bills, of which there were a lot, and I don't know if you directly were involved with this, but I do know dog attacks have been a serious issue, including on humans, including fatal in your district. I believe the dangerous dog bill did pass. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes, it's very hard to pass any bill in the legislative session, and this bill was a very comprehensive bill that increases the penalty on dog attacks. And the reason why it's very important to me is I had a constituent who was mauled by dogs and died, and the only penalty was a misdemeanor for that incident. And this really brings justice to anyone who's mauled by dogs, and and it happens, and you pass away. It's tragic. Shannon Matson also has been a strong advocate, and she had helped with this, as well as Stephanie Kendrick with the Humane Society. We still have some work to do with this legislation, and just like with the abandoned vehicles, Chad, we have to talk to all the different counties to figure out on the dangerous dog designation, because each county deals with their appeal process and that part of the procedure differently, and we want to make sure that we come up with the best process for everyone. And but right now, if the governor signs that bill,
what will it do?
it will increase the penalty from a misdemeanor to a Class C felony.
If someone's dog,
When a dog severely cause bodily harm.
got it.
So when it comes to like my sister's dog, which is close to Maltese, it's very tiny and small. If that dog were to bite me, it doesn't cause any serious harm, and if I were to file a lawsuit, it wouldn't be a Class C felony. It would be only like a misdemeanor. But those kind of, what this does really is provide justice for those serious incidents that are dog attacks.
Okay, great. We're moving into our last 10 minutes here. Gene, a quick question for you from a reader. Please cite an example of a good bill which failed due to an imbalance of our supposedly two-party legislature.
A good bill that failed.
Microphone, please. And if you can't think of one, that's all right, but it was coming from a reader.
I probably have it in my notes, in my, my many notes here.
Was there a bill that you were championing that you wished had passed but
Well,
didn't?
no, I think probably the bill that I'm most proud of, which comes back every year, not proud of, I'm just happy that the sanity and not numbing and dumbing down the people of Hawaii with the legalization of marijuana bill. I think that was an outstanding accomplishment. Contrary to what the Senate does every year, the House, I think, brought in some sensibility.
Just to make it clear that
Senator?
Gene and I are friends. I appreciate him. We've bickered back and forth, but you're not really being loyal opposition unless it stings a little. So this is his job, and
Well, no, I genuinely
he does it. You
not
know?
just as a loyal opposition, but one who sees the downside of what we learned from California, what we learned from Colorado. My God, if we don't learn from what they've done in terms of public safety and public health, mental health, we are just dumbing down ourselves.
I'll just speak briefly on cannabis. You know, I respect the legislative process. There wasn't support in the House, so the bill didn't pass, and that's the way this process is supposed to go. There were plenty of reasons to vote no. I thought there were plenty of reasons to vote yes. Alcohol is more destructive and caffeine is more addictive. These are facts.
Yeah.
As was reported after the session, it would have been more helpful if it happened in February, but the federal government right now is moving to deschedule.
Yes, they
Part
are.
of what we did in the 306-page bill was put together a regulatory framework to allow local producers to monetize and commodify their operations while we still can preserve local advantage. The Commerce Clause does not apply to activity that's not recognized by the federal government. So 100% labeling and all of the protectionist mechanisms that we are not allowed to do on federally authorized products, we could have done if the measure passed. If we go to federal descheduling before there is a legalization bill, we will not be able to do those things, and the local producers will be competing with Walmart joints and imports from the continental U.S. There are plenty of reasons why people should be concerned. I'm not gonna, I respect those arguments. What we tried to put forward was comprehensive legislation that was responsible.
Okay, and to be clear,
Point
we're
of time.
talking about a recreational marijuana bill and a further decriminalization. It already does exist. It depends on the amount. And the federal one scheduling, that makes marijuana the same level as LSD and heroin. The idea is to move it down to Schedule 3.
But Jed, we
Chad,
would
point of
be amiss.
clarification.
Greggor, go ahead. And then
Wasn't the
Gene.
question was a bill that didn't pass but you want it passed? So
Great question.
Does Representative Ward want legalized marijuana?
No, I'm pretty sure he doesn't.
By the way, this is the guy, when I said the word Fauci science on the floor, ruled me out of order. This is something that happens often. Last year, when I mentioned
Let's keep going, Chad.
Makai,
Yes. Okay.
he struck it from the
Ju-
point
just
is
one-
freedom of speech is sometimes limited.
Just one other point of clarification.
Yes.
Clarification on the cannabis legislation. We did have the votes in the House. We just didn't have it in our third committee. So I wanted to clarify
that's a good
that we
point.
are going to continue that legislation moving forward. But that beautiful legislation and the bill that made it as far as it could was from Senator Keohokalole. So we're grateful for that. And when we think of advancing other economic sectors, I think we need to look at cannabis as economic diversification, Representative Ward, and I'll leave it at that.
We would be amiss, Chad, if we don't go to the St. Louis position on HB 3202. Everybody, the character of all your neighborhoods are going to change because this bill passed.
The accessory dwelling
The
units.
accessory dwelling one.
Yeah, okay.
Unlimited number of accessory dwellings.
Okay. We are running out of time, but I got to tell you, this is great. This has been wonderful. I think in the remaining time that we have, I do want to give each of you a chance, essentially a closing remark, but I did ask you earlier, was there, at least before the session started or before this forum, was there any particular issue that you champion? I know, Kirstin, this is your first 2 years that you're completing. Anything that you wanted to mention that maybe didn't get the attention that should have? And this is your chance right now. Also a way to work in closing remarks, essentially, because we're shooting for a 1:30 stop pretty hard. Kirstin.
Oh, there's so many wonderful things. I think I will mention that as one of the 20 freshmen in the House, we did shape the legislature in the House in a different way. brand new ideas, brand new members, just the energy level probably shifted, and other members probably were going nuts. So if they're more exhausted, it's because the energy level in the House transitioned and transformed with 20 new members and 4 appointees. So there's a lot that has been going on in the House, and I'm honored to be one of those 20. One thing I didn't mention is that we were able to fund the Double Up Bucks program, the Bucks, and so that's a food security.
What does that do? Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
food security measure that I was passionate about and have been, as well as our vice speaker here. That program essentially takes anyone that's a SNAP recipient, formerly known as food stamps. That takes any local fresh fruits and vegetable produce. If you sign up to be a Bucks member, it cuts that bill in half. So if you're buying $30 worth of local lettuce from a farmer at a participating retailer in grocery stores, but also at our farmers markets, that $30 now costs you $15. So your food goes more. And we put $1.5 million in recurring funds. I'm honored and grateful that we made that move. Food security efforts help Maui recovery, as well as help everyone coming off of the pandemic who have food insecurity. We also were able to fund the food bank to shore up all 4 major food banks. So if there are emergency disasters, there's state funding from the beginning that's put into supporting those initiatives. I believe that was in grant and aid, and it might have been $700,000 was a bill that didn't move, but we put it in the grant and aid funding program. Something where I think we need to grow on is there was a housekeeping measure to strengthen farm-to-school initiatives. I think there's more we can do to get and meet our farm-to-school and farm-to-state laws. We have a 30% by 2030 law, and we have a 50% by 2050 for several state departments that have cafeterias and feeding programs for our state. And I think that's something I'm very passionate about. That also helps our farmers and food producers scale operations if they can produce enough food to feed our largest cafeteria or largest food consumer in the state is our DOE public schools. So that's something I think we can work on, and I'm excited to just do more in future legislative sessions to come. So thank
very
you for
much.
having us, Civil Beat.
Absolutely. Greggor, and then Jean, and we'll end with Jarrett.
Chad, I can see why my hair's not growing anymore. I'm pretty sure you're invited, Jean, to every one of these things from now on. I just wanted to first say or end with thank you to my constituents for giving me this opportunity to serve them. And it's been such a pleasure to work with my colleagues, especially, Chad, did you know, 2 years ago, I was on the lower half of the legislature. Now, with the 20 freshmen, I'm actually on the upper half. That's insane when it comes to seniority. So that's the changes that's happening in our state legislature. There are a lot of things that has happened as well that wasn't mentioned. There's a lot of good work from our chairs, especially Chair Tarnas with having the constitutional amendment on marriage and removing that in our constitution. We just need our community to vote for it. The other part is our tourism chairs with our visitor app. I know sometime we were having that debate regarding green fees, but maybe the best way to do it is by destination, and this visitor app could be that.
Essentially tracking where they go, is that correct?
That could be part
Without
of it
being
as well.
invasive. Okay.
There has to be a 1.0, maybe in the 3.0
I see.
version,
Okay.
they'll have that. But there's a lot of good work that our chairs have put up, and I could end with many of those. But because we're short on time, I do want to end with the question that was asked by Representative Ward. There is a bill that died that I wish passed that could help our state, and that is regarding the insurance working group. And this bill was going to establish a working group to look into our insurance and figure out how we could address and have a solution in the future. I wish we had that because that would have provided funding to have this working group, and maybe when this insurance problem becomes a crisis all throughout the state, we have a solution that could work. And I wish that bill did pass, but unfortunately,
Okay.
it didn't.
We are going to go over just a few minutes with your indulgence. I hope that's okay. There's no hearing to rush off to. Rep. Ward.
How many of you had your insurance canceled, your hazard insurance? I certainly stand for one. The condo insurance, this is a big issue that he just mentioned. In wrapping up, I want to mention there are some bills that didn't belong in this session. There was a reso that says, you right-wing Republicans, you're responsible for all the bad things in America. Come on, give me a break. It was not balanced whatsoever. Secondly, there was a bill that said the pro-Palestinian position is the only position we should take. Not fair, not balanced whatsoever. They didn't belong there, actually. But the bill that did belong there that didn't get passed was this, as I mentioned earlier, was the securitization bill. We've got to revisit that for HECO. But I want to mention the silliest bill that we had, contrary to the neighbor island position, was legalizing jaywalking. So, you know, you can jaywalk nowadays, but be careful, you're probably going to get hit if you do it, unless you're in the big expanses of the neighbor islands. I thought that was just really a waste of our time. But in a serious note, what we've got to do is to really give, as we did with Kauai under Aniki, give them everything that they need. And I'm not sure that they know what they need, or they have the leadership of what they know that they need, and they have the coordination to implement that. I'm not being cynical. I'm getting it from what I see as the data. It just doesn't mesh together in a united, let's get the job done way. And I hope I'm wrong, but we need to give Maui more of our time and more of our money. Lastly, the impending insurance costs, I think I would go back to the beginning of, we probably, Chad, with your suggestion, to do a special session. People are going to be hit with thousands upon thousands of dollars increases. And that's individuals, not just the condos themselves. Lastly, on the Hawaiian issues, I want you to know that Kali Watson is doing a great job with the $600 million that your taxpayers paid. And we gave him a safety net, just in case he didn't make the deadline. We gave him another year. So just know well that $600 million is being spent well. And let me add this on a personal note. If we gave $600 million to any other group, we'd never put a watchdog committee to make sure that we do it. We still haven't got the full trust of the Hawaiian community, or giving them the full trust that they need. So lastly, I would say it's a session that I would give a B-, and to remind everyone that life is ono when you're pono. Thank you, Chair.
Jarrett, segue to you.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you for letting me finish up. I agree with what both Greggor and Jean just brought up. The insurance issue is one that's going to continue to grow in concern, and I think there really wasn't enough attention paid to it. I put a tremendous amount of work into it. We did have informal working groups convening in the months prior to the session, and we'll be reinitiating those going forward. Ultimately, to go back to my Pali Highway landslide story, I think ultimately what happened looking back at it now, because I thought we had a bill and it fell apart at the end, is that, again, it's one of these issues that is not at the level of a crisis yet, that we just could not get to the finish line on. And part of that is we do need the public to push us on things. The public often gets its way at the legislature. The stories sometimes do not get told in that way, but public sentiment prevails at the legislature all the time. And that's one that we really need the public's help and attention on. Unfortunately, I think it's just going to continue to become more challenging. And it's not just a condominium issue. The fact is, climate change is causing more and more disasters around the world. And the big banks that underwrite homeowners insurance, not just in America, but around the world, are rebalancing their portfolios to account for the risk. The global underwriters of insurance lost $100 million a year 4 out of the last 5 years in a row. And the reason they did is not because of the Maui wildfire, it's because of climate change and the fact that we have more catastrophic storms in greater frequencies more consistently. And it's going to take time for the global financial markets to throw out their models, redevelop new ones, and account for it. We are, a small state, and we are subject to those outside forces. What we can do is take action similar to the way we did after Iniki, put together state funds that do not compete with the private market, but provide options for people who just cannot get insurance otherwise. That will not make policies cheaper. They will make them available so that people can continue to pay their mortgages without getting crazy Lloyd's of London forced place insurance, those types of scenarios. So I'll stop on that one because that one went a little deep. But the work doesn't end just because the legislature ends. It keeps going. We do as much as we can get done in one session, and then we just move forward. I think we did do a lot of positive things that have been developing for a long time, like labeling. And we end, recapping the things that we didn't do and that are going to be priorities next year.
I was going to ask, what's your favorite place for lunch within walking distance of the Capitol? But it's time. Okay, we'll ask. What's your favorite place to eat within walking distance?
Madam Saigon.
Okay, very
It's
good.
the square barrel. It replaced Square Barrels. It's brand new.
Got it. Okay.
It's pretty good.
Kirstin?
We get to leave the building for lunch during session.
You do if your session's 5
They
minutes
haven't
long.
told you that yet?
maybe only in the Senate. Gosh, I'm so brand new, but I do like umekes.
Okay, sure. Not too far. Greggor?
In the house we share a lot, so I typically cook, so I bring home lunch and I eat that because I'm on a certain diet. But I do want to plug in the blind vendor. She just got this.
Ground floor, the little shop down there.
Yep. Sometimes I buy a plate lunch there and eat it. So go check her out.
Emily's her name. And Jean?
Vicky's 4th Street Mall, the best pork adobo west of the
Got
Mississippi.
it. Okay. Thank you to Senator Jarrett Keohokalole, Representative Kirstin Kahaloa, Representative Greggor Ilagan, and Representative Jean Ward. Thank you, everybody. Take care. I'm Chad Blair from Honolulu Civil Beat.